everyone. My name is Astra, and I will be the host for this afternoon's event. I'm super thrilled to be here today celebrating trees in the wild and spreading awareness for Canada's contribution to the Queen's Commonwealth canopy, the Great Bear Rainforest. Some housekeeping notes just before we get started. Everyone has been muted to avoid background noises, so please mute your microphone or phone line when you are not speaking. There will be a 20-minute Q&A at the end of the session. During this section, please use the raise your hand button to indicate that you would like to ask a question. The raise your hand button can be found by clicking on participants. Alternatively, you can add your question into the chat box. Please note you can also send chat messages to the entire meeting or privately between attendees, but please ensure that such messages are sent to the correct specific person. There will be 3 door prizes at the end of today's event. In order to receive a door prize, you must be in the room at the time of the draw. We'll also be recording this event. If you would prefer not to be in the recording, please feel free to turn off your camera or rename yourself. If you need assistance with this, please privately message RCSVI from the top of the participants list. And I will hand it over to David Spence to open us up.
Thank you, Astra. Hello, I'm David Spence. As president of the Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island, I'm your MC for this Trees in the Wild Zoom experience. Welcome to each and every one of you who have come from afar and from nearby. Welcome to those who have come from the north, the south, the east, and the west. The place where we are gathered is the Lekwungen territory, where Coast Salish indigenous knowledge and practices reside, an earthly place with which everyone has a sacred relationship. So today, on this 66th day of the year 2021 of the Common Era, we are here to share ancient wisdom, mingling with migrant ways and knowledge of trees in the wild. In the next couple of hours, we will weave together practices and provisions with one another to formulate the wholeness of all our relations. In bringing this about, I'd like to welcome our special presenters. Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, Janet Austin. Her Honor, the Commissioner of Yukon, Angelique Bernard, Bienvenue. Spencer Greening from the Sierra Club of British Columbia. Jens Wieting from Sierra Club, also of BC, and Kevin Smith from Maple Leaf Adventures in Victoria. The Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island, employs a full program theme for this year, Trees for Life. This particular theme is translated and divided into different projects. One of these projects is the RCSVI Zoom events. Today's Trees in the Wild is the third in a series of Zoomable opportunities. The first Zoom was Tree Appreciation, held in November of 2020. The second Zoom was Trees in the City, held in January of 2021. And now the third Zoom, engaging people who have a special, creative, and intimate relationship with trees in the wild, especially those trees in the Great Bear Rainforest on the western coast of the Pacific Ocean in British Columbia. The Great Bear Rainforest is composed of almost 6.5 million hectares, an area almost the size of Ireland, and with 1/4 of the world's coastal temperate rainforest. The Great Bear Rainforest is chosen as the place of trees in the wild because it was selected to be Canada's gift to the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy. Now, the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy is a Commonwealth initiative that emerged from the 2015 Commonwealth Heads of Government held in Malta. 48 of the 54 nations have now designated a national forest to the pan-Commonwealth ecological opportunity. Almost 12 million hectares are currently so designated. Canada's contribution was formally received on behalf of the Queen, head of the Commonwealth, in 2016, when Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, visited BC with his family. The other projects in the Trees for Life program, you ask? Well, there is the planting of trees. This particular project is a collaboration with the City of Victoria and their creation of a mini park in downtown Victoria known as the Triangle Green. Here you see a picture of myself and one of the 7 black tupelo trees that were chosen to be planted on the eastern side of the triangle by the landscaper. Now all 7 trees have been planted, and they stand as an integral part of the centennial of the Royal Commonwealth Society and as a way to expand awareness of trees for the well-being of community, conviviality, and ecological benefits. The second project in which RCSVI is particularly involved is the Queen's Commonwealth Essay Competition. This is a special opportunity for youth to write a poem, fiction or nonfiction, a short story, or even a piece of music. The 2021 theme for the writing opportunity is Community in the Commonwealth. The theme of the 2020 Queen's Commonwealth Essay Competition was Climate Change in the Commonwealth. And then on Sunday, April 25th, 2021, an additional Zoom project will be held to honor the British Columbia achievers for that last year. Back to today's Zoom, we are most privileged to have Orca Book Publishers contributing 3 books for door prizes, which will be happening at the end of the conversation. I would also like to remind everyone that the second Monday in March is designated as Commonwealth Day. And so today, with this Zoom, on the day preceding the second Monday in March, we are anticipating tomorrow's activities and the events that will follow all week long. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Her Honor, Janet Austin, the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, to bring initial greetings to Trees in the Wild Zoom gathering. Your Honor.
Sorry about that. You'd think I'd know by now about that mute button. Anyway, David, thank you so very much. And hello to all of my good friends joining us today. I am speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt, whom I wish to thank for sharing these lands in peace and friendship. Aitsquaicho, Stelacha, Aikwanis, Quinangahela, which despite my terrible pronunciation, means good day, dear friends. It's wonderful to be among you today. And I mean that so very sincerely, because indeed this group of people is very dear to me. I will start by saying how very proud I am to serve as her representative, as Her Majesty's representative here in British Columbia. Also, on behalf of myself and all of us in the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, I wish to express our heartfelt best wishes for the good health of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. It gives me the greatest pleasure to celebrate Commonwealth Day with the leadership and the membership of the Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island, and with another member of Canada's Viceregal family, the Honorable Angelique Bernard, Commissioner of Yukon. Angelique, it's so good to see you. We were both saying that our last official event from prior to the pandemic was this event, which we spent together and spent a few days together. So I look forward to being able to do that again. In addition to Commonwealth Day, March 8th is also International Women's Day. And I find myself reflecting on the fact that Her Majesty is an international symbol of exceptional female leadership. She is a symbol of grace, of selfless adherence to duty, and of restrained, self-governing power. Qualities that we could use a lot more of in the world today, and qualities that are manifest in her leadership of the Commonwealth. There is no day that could be more meaningful to me than the day upon which we celebrate the work of the 54 Commonwealth nations that we do together. The theme for Commonwealth Day 2021 is delivering a common future, connecting, innovating, and transforming. It was established with particular reference to the urgent demands of responding to the global pandemic, but also and always to advance human rights and the rule of law, to build peace and harmony through democratic and social development, to promote a shared vision of shared prosperity and inclusive economic empowerment that will benefit all people, and to combat climate change and protect the biodiversity, the unique landscapes and the marine environments of our member nations and of the world. I thank all of you for embracing this commitment so very wholeheartedly. It's worth remembering that despite our many challenges, the past year has also brought a generous sharing of new knowledge and built trust among traditional adversaries. It has taught us patience, compassion, and humility, caused us to reflect seriously on systemic racism and social and economic inequalities. It's reminded us to better appreciate our mutual interdependence. Here in Canada, I believe we're seeing a renewal of commitment to the foundational Canadian values of diversity and inclusion, tempered by a recognition that the equal society we aspire to is not a reality for many, and that we have work to do. And I am forever grateful for our system of governance, our constitutional monarchy, which provides a steadying rudder, linking us outward to the Commonwealth and connecting us to a tradition of stability, parliamentary democracy, and equality before the law. The principles of peace, order, and good government manifest through the Crown that guide our actions and provide a stable platform for our democracy to flourish. These are the principles that bring life to the vision of the Commonwealth and contribute to a culture of cooperation and connection among nations. I've pledged to do my part to promote the values and principles that bind together the member nations of the Commonwealth. I do believe that we must strive to act as a global community if we truly want to deliver a common future of greater equality and shared prosperity. I'm excited about our conversation today, Trees in the Wild, and I commend the members of the Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island, for your splendid work extending the Queen's Commonwealth canopy with the urban grove of trees, the Triangle Park, and for your ongoing educational programming on the importance of Indigenous forests to the health of our planet and, frankly, of ourselves. I'm looking forward to learning more about the Great Bear Rainforest, Canada's very generous gift to the Queen's canopy, and I hope to have opportunities to further explore this vast and cherished region of our province once we're permitted to travel and to convene in groups. And perhaps Her Honor Angelique might consider meeting me there to share in a vice-regal hike, maybe a bird-watching adventure. I'm up for anything that this glorious region has to offer. Finally, I want to express my heartfelt thanks to Mr. David Spence and Ms. Donna Otto for your leadership of the Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island, and to all the members of the Society for your truly splendid work. I am so very proud to support your endeavors. Haishka, merci, thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you for your greetings, Your Honor. In turn, I would like to invite Her Honor Angelique Bernard, the Commissioner of Yukon, to share with us her greetings. Your Honor.
Yes. Thank you to David Spence for the invitation to attend today's gathering. Hello, Your Honor. And I apologize as I will have to leave. Early before the end of the event, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation. It is my pleasure to bring virtual greetings from Yukon on the traditional territory of the Kwanlindon First Nation and the Tan-Kwachan Council. Pour les arbres dans la nature, une conversation sur la forêt pluviale de Great Bear et le jour du Commonwealth 2021. Whitehorse, the Yukon's capital, is truly known as the Wilderness City. As I was writing this speech, I was looking out my window into the forest surrounding my house. It borders the green belt, so our backyard opens up to a system of trails where many people enjoy skiing, dog walking, hiking, biking, and more to decompress and relax. Être entouré de forêt apporte un sentiment de paix, de beauté et de grandeur. J'adore faire des promenades avec notre chien dans le sentier vert derrière notre maison. Several of our schools are surrounded by trees that are utilized by the teachers and students. This instills in our children the importance of looking after our forest and ourselves at a young age. A lot of schools have also started schools in the forest programs. Les arbres sont primordiaux pour notre vie et notre santé. Trees are vital for our life. Looking back on my ecology class in grade 7, oh so many years ago, I still remember the importance that trees play in keeping ourselves and our planet healthy. Especially during these unprecedented times, forests are a place of refuge and a way to clear our minds. So thank you again to David Spence and his team for organizing this virtual event. Merci encore de l'invitation. So merci, Gunal Shish, Masicho, Shanitan. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Your Honor. Thank you, and bringing us greetings from the Yukon Territory. To take this project, Trees in the Wild, a bit further into the depths of the Great Bear Rainforest, I would like to introduce our next speaker. He is a PhD student in the Faculty of Environment at Simon Fraser University, Burnaby, British Columbia. There, as a member of the Tsimshian community, he is studying the relationship between Gitga'at traditional ecological knowledge, language, and history in conjunction with the Western post-industrial revolution attitudes and practices. He is also a scholar in the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. From the Sierra Club of BC and SFU in Burnaby, please welcome Spencer Greening.
Thank you for that kind introduction, David. And yeah, I'm calling in today from Tsimshian territories, unceded Tsimshian territories. And to clarify, my home community is the Gitga'at First Nation. People may know of the village of Hartley Bay. But I hold a number of roles in the community, as well as those ones you spoke of. A community researcher, and I get thrown into the wrestling ring of politics every now and then sometimes too. But enough of that. I think we are here to talk about trees. And so I want to dive right in and talk about trees and what I think of trees when it comes to my home territories. I've been reading a lot and thinking a lot about this idea that's come up amongst Western scientists lately. This idea of mother trees. And there's this talk now how mother trees, you can imagine a giant old growth tree in the forest, a giant cedar, communicates and provides nutrients and knowledge and resilience on like a minute by minute, second by second basis to all the other trees surrounding it. And it's this beautiful phenomenon that this one tree that scientists are calling a mother tree almost commands and controls how a forest grows for the better. And this comes from this essentially, the way I make sense of it, this idea that this tree is in deep relationship with every other tree. It's investing in its relationship with every other tree in that forest, not even its own species, but trees of another species as well. And it's not existing as this solitary thing. That tree is not a solitary thing. So as I sit here today and reflect on my own experiences, my own teachings from my people and my elders, I wonder how many people in our modern society and current society believe that we as humans can communicate and listen and influence our ecosystems for the better, making them more resilient and more rich with biodiversity, just as these mother trees are doing. Just by being in relationship with them, by participating with them. But in order to do that, we have to truly believe that we are as much as a part of the forest as that tree that I'm talking about, that mother tree is. We have to believe that we have a role in that forest. And we have to participate and act on that belief. Unfortunately, the industrial Western world has failed to do this. In my world, when I try to make sense of this, it feels like this clashing of Western science, the Industrial Revolution, and Western spirituality slamming together and separating through our own social stories in the Western world, saying that we're not a part of these ecosystems. The stories say that we don't fully belong here, that we're here to extract. And it's too bad because we enable this vocabulary in English. We enable these actions with our vocabulary in English with words like wild and wilderness, which is ironic that that's a part of the discussion, the title of the discussion today, Wild Forests. But to contrast that, I've never come across an indigenous language that has had a word or held the concept of wild or wilderness in regards to an ecosystem. People are inherently a part of it. It is their home. So when I think of this discussion, I imagine two different societies. We have a society on one hand, the modern society we see today, that through its actions, it seems like it sees itself separate from the natural world. Not only separate, but almost like a negative feature on the landscape. And it's created this outlook that all we can do is extract and hurt. But we don't have to be that. It may feel true in recent times, but we don't have to be that. But sadly, it's created this reality that because humans are bound to extract and hurt these environments, we justify our immense damage sometimes through resource extraction by throwing on band-aids, by putting fences around particular areas and saying they're protected, saying they're wild, they're conservancies. And this becomes our management model. And it's almost these two extremes combating against each other. But when I think of my own community and the knowledge that I've been passed down, I see my society and how it understands our place is inherently a part of that forest, of that ecosystem. And how we're tied to these places just as the salmon are, as the bear are, as these trees are. And it's our job to find our role, just as those salmon have found a role. And just as those bear have found a role in that forest. It's through these millennia-long relationships as Indigenous people that we have reached this societal maturity to understand our role in this forest, that we belong there. And through that ingenuity, that human ingenuity that's come through millennia of relationship, we're able to build these relationships that we can help forests thrive. We can help forests become resilient and biodiverse, just as that mother tree has done. And we don't need to consider them wild. We can consider them a part of us. So as we talk about forests and what we might call the wild in English, I hope we can see that we're not talking about something wild and untamed and thus pristine or correct from a natural perspective. I hope we can see we're talking about something that I and my lineage and my people are inherently married to and a part of. They're almost like this partner that we walk together in this lifelong path. And so I guess I'll get to the meat and potatoes of this now. I mean, this all might sound kind of romantic and okay, what's this guy getting at here? But what does this actually look like for the Gitga'at people or Indigenous people in the Great Bear Rainforest? Well, I would say that under Indigenous law, which can be just as complex and in depth as the Canadian parliamentary system, just as many laws and governance particularities, these Indigenous governments have long-standing agreements or treaties or marriages, if you want to put it that way, to each and every species in these forests that make these trees thrive. These species tell us how to harvest them. They give us insight in how to live with them, how to be their partner. And they give us these stories through our own spiritual and cultural understanding. I've used the term marriage. It's really easy for me to understand this relationship in these stories when I imagine it as a marriage between humans and another species. Because it's about honoring a relationship. It's saying we're both in this picture together. How do we move forward? It's not just about studying them or having a little peek. We can imagine what that would look like in a human-to-human marriage. Imagine if in that partnership or that marriage, you only studied them or you only read about your partner in books. Or if that, you only got a touristy peek at it a couple of weeks of every year. Would that marriage be sustainable? It wouldn't, and it would be very hard to manage. So we can't preface our lives by saying that we aren't a part of these ecosystems, that they are separate from us. There's this video out of the introduction of wolves to Yellowstone Park, and it talks about this idea of trophic cascade, where they introduce the wolves, and it makes the entire park become more biodiverse and the plants and the trees thrive because they offer this predatory balance. And to our people, it's very common knowledge and understood that humans are a part of that too. This Yellowstone video fails to recognize that humans are a part of that web in that species. And there's ways we can do that. And I'll tell a couple stories here about how the Gitga'at do that. First one I'd like to talk about is salmon. Everyone knows the Great Bear Rainforest we're salmon people. All the Indigenous people up and down the coast love salmon. We have this story about this boy who was captured by the salmon and brought down to their world under the water because the people were harvesting salmon in the wrong way. and because I only have 15 minutes here today, I'll make it short, but they lay out these rules. They lay out these techniques on how he should fish, and they say, go tell the rest of the humans, this is how you're supposed to fish. We know that you rely on us. We know that the forests rely on us. So we want you to fish us, but this is how we do it from here on out. And that's the basis of the marriage, is a healthy boundary. And so these fish and these animals, we have stories how certain animals gave us this fish net, and this animal gave us this fish weir and taught us how to use it. And so today we build these fisheries with these technologies through things like selective fishing that science is now proving. We are actively manipulating rivers and making them more resilient, and making fish populations more resilient and stronger just through those techniques of fishing. And unfortunately, in contrast, it's been the colonial government that made these techniques illegal and actively destroyed these traps. And we need science today to legitimize our ways of being so we can go back to this. But to paint a picture, you can imagine how people on the ground, when given these tools from these species, we know how to fish in the proper way. That then affects the river. It then affects the bears who eat that fish, the birds who eat that fish, and how much fish they have, which then affects these trees. And then those mother trees can send those nutrients throughout the entire forest and design the forest we see today in the Great Bear Rainforest. I don't know if people know this, but if you look at the growth rings of a tree in our watershed, you can look at the large growth years, and it coincides with a large salmon run. Another example of this, we talk about clam gardens. We build a rock wall that traps in these pools, and it changes temperatures. And it just so happens that through these indigenous practices, that clams would actually grow up to 4 times larger and produce 4 times more in numbers. And what that would do is create this biodiversity that was so rich for these beaches and so rich for these forests that we as humans are actively manipulating what the forest looks like. Hopefully there's time, but I'd be happy to share these studies, the research that's happening around this now. But I want you to imagine how this relationship with each of these species exists for not only them, but also the trees, also certain plants, also certain berries, also the bears, the mountain goat, from the mountaintop to the ocean floor. These rules, these laws, these regulations under indigenous governance exist for each species. So to sort of bring this to a conclusion, I want to make it clear that in order to make this rich ecosystem that we see, we must participate in it. To participate in an ecosystem is a necessary human belief. It needs to be a necessary human belief. It needs to be an aspect of our lives for human survival, to believe we are a part of these ecosystems. And every human culture has had that as a part of their belief system until the industrialized era. I realize I may have been hard on on Western science, but it's important to recognize Western science is only a tool. And just as a hammer or a paintbrush, the person behind the tool affects how it's used. And we can pair Western science with indigenous knowledge, just as we have with researching our clam gardens and our ways of fishing salmon, to bring insight in how we build more resilient ecosystems for the future. I would never claim that our people created all of the beauty in the Great Bear Rainforest, but there's without a doubt that we definitely enabled its beauty and were a catalyst for it in some way for these forests. And we can now understand that we as humans helped create some of the most prosperous salmon runs in the world, some of the most productive beaches on the coast, which all led to some of the richest forests we can find in British Columbia. And so when we recognize this and we believe this and live this, we can then invite our human species to make better decisions about these forests and their ecosystems in the future. I'll pass it on to the next speaker, or maybe give it back to David. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Spencer. Most fascinating presentation and profound. Our next speaker brings an international experience to the Great Bear Rainforest from Germany, the Amazon, Central America, and Indonesia. He is an accomplished photographer, often willing to get down and dirty to examine the critters among the giant trees in the rainforests with heartfelt passion. His work is primarily in the area of protecting BC's rainforest and challenging climate change. From the Sierra Club in British Columbia, please welcome Jens Wieting.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us, and a big thank you to all the guest speakers and everyone who's joining this afternoon. Thank you for caring about the trees and the forests. And I'm still thinking about your words, Lagout. It was very insightful, and I think I will try to connect with some of your ideas, which will be difficult because it was the way you shared it can only be done by an Indigenous person who has practiced these insights and knows it in and out. But I think this is so important because we do live in a very challenging time with a number of big crises. It's very difficult to talk about trees without acknowledging that we have a big challenge in terms of the extinction crisis and the climate crisis. But before I go there, I will take a look at sharing my screen and using my slides. So I hope this will become full screen now. Yes. So thanks again, and I hope to connect with Lagout's thought. But before I go there, a few words about Sierra Club BC. You mentioned that we are both connected with this organization. Lagout is on our board, and I'm Sierra Club BC's Forest and Climate Campaigner and Science Advisor. And our organization has a history, as you know, of working towards protecting intact ecosystems, and for climate action we have a big environmental education program. And in 2019 we celebrated our 50th anniversary, and right now we are in the midst of a bit of a transformation process. And here are two documents that I recommend to read a little bit more about this. But it's very important for our organization to come to grasp with the fact that over the 50 years of our existence, many of our conservation efforts, often leading to parks, in many cases undermined indigenous rights. So a number of parks and protected areas in BC were created without the consent of indigenous peoples, and we are trying to understand our role in this context and to learn more about indigenous perspectives, and making sure that all our work is grounded in respect for indigenous rights and understanding our past and doing better in the future. this afternoon, I hope to continue where Lagoud left off and talk a little bit more about how I think this distinction between wild and not wild, or often protected, not protected, or intact and degraded, is actually one of the underlying causes of these of the ecological and the climate crisis. And I want to talk a little bit about our challenge to fully grasp this rapid ecological decline and the term shifting baseline syndrome. I think this is something that is impacting us and our ability to change course. We have very little old growth forests with truly big trees left, and they are still at risk. And we really are at a point where we need a U-turn, and indigenous knowledge, like we just heard, can guide us if we really listen. Solutions exist, but we need them today, not tomorrow, because we are so close to really problematic tipping points. This is the landscape where I grew up in northern Germany, close to the coast of the North Sea, highly developed, and I had lots of books with plants and animals, but there were not that many plants and animals to see outside. So I had to travel far and wide pretty soon after leaving, after high school, to explore and see more of the natural places that I loved. So I definitely yearned for the wild, as they say, and I still had to learn a bit more about the layers with the word wild. So I moved to BC with my family, with my partner, and our then one-year-old daughter in 2006, and I experienced many moments of joy since in the old growth forest under big trees. I had no idea they existed, and really unique, even after spending quite a bit of time in tropical rainforests. Still blown away every time I have a chance to stand under these giants that only exist in very few places on the planet. And it helped me to understand what happened to me a little more after reading some of these books. J.B. McKinnon, The Once and Future World, George Monbiot, Farrell. They talk about shifting baseline syndrome. This is something that got introduced in a short essay by a scientist based here in BC, Daniel Pauly, and he wrote about fisheries and how this syndrome has arisen because each generation of fisheries scientists accept as a baseline the stock size and species composition that occurred at the beginning of their careers and uses this to evaluate changes. When the next generation starts its career, the stocks have further declined, but it is the stocks at that time that serve as a new baseline. The result, obviously, is a gradual shift of the baseline, a gradual accommodation of the creeping disappearance of resource species and inappropriate reference points for evaluating economic losses resulting from overfishing. So what I experienced, and many others who grew up in very developed landscapes without a lot of diversity, was a reverse baseline shift. What people from Germany and other countries experience when they all of a sudden they experience a place where you can actually still see bears or wolves and eagles, sometimes all at the same time. It's this reverse baseline shift, and it helped me a little bit to understand where this joy comes from. What I didn't expect is that I would also experience a lot of heartbreak moving to BC, because we still have this ongoing degradation of these last wild places. So just to give you one example, this is a report I wrote in December 2019 looking at 13 years of logging in BC. We added up the clear cuts, counted 3.6 million hectares, about a little more than half old growth forest for a 13-year period, 2005 to 2017. The total area clear cut is bigger than Vancouver Island, and more than half of this is old growth forest. It translates to hundreds of soccer fields per day on average. And again, the problem is here, we are not understanding how quickly this is happening. I really like this graphic created by Quentin Mackey, which visualizes the thousands of years of indigenous history with ecosystems being left intact, lots of relationships happening, never undermining ecological integrity, and the short history of indigenous and settlers going back 100, 200 years. And in this short period, we have this happening globally, but also in BC with more than 1,800 species at risk. And of course, the climate crisis. And we're not going to talk a lot about this, but obviously these things are happening together. And it's another reason why we have so little time to change course. This is a brand new map developed by a group called Conservation North, showing all the forests in BC that have been industrially degraded, and only the areas in green are left as so-called primary forest, which essentially means that there has been no industrial logging. And as you can see, there are few areas, particularly in the Great Bear Rainforest, where we still have intact old growth forests. But even in the Great Bear Rainforest, we still have to work through some of the needed solutions to make sure that what remains will be left for future generations. A little bit of zooming in. I quickly want to show two photos from a trip through the Great Bear Rainforest in 2017 I was part of with Outer Shores on their Passing Cloud, a beautiful trip. And we had a chance to visit Tricat Island and see archaeologists who made headlines the same year, 2017, when they found evidence of 14,000 years old settlements on this island in the Great Bear Rainforest in Hellside territory. It's unbelievable time span, very difficult to grasp, 14,000 years. And in contrast, we passed several of those industrial sites, like I think this was Namu cannery, that only existed for a few decades before they collapsed, because it was a boom and bust industrial activity, and the contrast was really extreme. And here's another example how we are often failing to at least monitor and understand the change. This is a reminder what the situation is on Vancouver Island in terms of disappearing old growth. Areas in yellow are second growth or young forest. And in 2017, two foresters wrote an op-ed in the Times Colonist where they assured the public that 62% of Vancouver Island's old growth is estimated to be protected, which sounds really good. But what they did is they focused on the percentage of what remains, also including all the smaller trees, not looking at the big trees. And of course, if you look at the percentage of what's left and to describe what's protected, we could simply continue to log all the unprotected old growth, and the end result would be 100% protection of the remaining old growth. But this is not how we can measure. We have to understand how much has already been logged, way more than 90% of the big tree old growth across BC. And we know that these are globally unique ecosystems. They're very rare, only small patches with temperate rainforest across the world. these are the few places where trees can grow really tall, very high carbon storage per hectare, and also one of the few places where trees can grow really old along the west coast of Turtle Island. And again, we know what the solutions are. I've been part of the work in the Great Bear Rainforest. These solutions must be tied to a government-to-government relationship between First Nations and the BC government. We need a network of protected areas, and we have to change how we manage the forest, how logging happens where it's still possible with ecosystem-based management. Conservation financing is needed to support First Nations, and to also financing to support the transition in the forestry sector to allow a long-term activity that doesn't undermine the environment. And now we have this really a powerful report from the BC Old Growth Panel, A New Future for Old Forest, which describes very comprehensive and 14 recommendations with timelines, including immediate response to protect big trees with interim solutions, working with indigenous governments, working to have a transition in place to ensure that forestry can continue after this paradigm shift that the panel called for and the BC government promised to implement happens. So again, this is important work, and we have to work together to make sure that we can see a real paradigm shift. And I want to end with this quote from a beautiful book, Robin Wall Kimmerer. I'm sure many of you heard about it, Braiding Sweetgrass. Tying back to indigenous knowledge, I think it's so important that we move away from this idea that we can protect small percentages of the land and sacrifice the rest. As a matter of fact, we have come so close to dangerous tipping points for ecosystems and a stable climate that we really have to give back. So instead of having a discussion about how much can we still take, how much can we give back, instead of logging more, how much can we restore, instead of polluting a little bit less, how much can we clean up, instead of consuming a little bit less, how much can we share to make sure that we can really change direction. And Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about reciprocity in her book, in the Sky Woman Falling chapter, about the story of Sky Woman. And what she writes is that it was through her actions in reciprocity, the give and take with the land, that the original immigrant became indigenous. For all of us, becoming indigenous to a place means living as if your children's future mattered. Take care of the land as if our lives, both material and spiritual, depended on it. And with this, I'm looking forward to our next speaker and our discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jens. Another fascinating perspective of the Great Bear Rainforest. And the third perspective that we have, our speaker is an explorer, an adventurer, a professional mariner, leader, and owner of Maple Leaf Adventures. He brings a deep wisdom and wide experience of knowing the Great Bear Rainforest. His knowledge that comes from the head and the heart is indeed a great treasure. From Maple Leaf Adventures in Victoria, BC, please welcome Kevin Smith.
Thank you, David, for that kind introduction. Thank you, Jens and Spencer. true wisdom and leadership for going forward, and for just acknowledging this beautiful long history from the Great Bear Rainforest. Truly honored to be part of this small panel today for this auspicious occasion. Thanks for having me, and I too have a small slideshow to attempt to share with you. Fingers crossed that the technology works for me. Doesn't always. Okay. Do you see that screen?
Yes.
Oh, thanks, David. Okay. So I understand that I've been given exactly 1.5 hours to go over this. Is that right, David? Or 15 minutes. And 15 minutes is going to be a little tricky, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay, I got it. 5 minutes. Yeah, I'd just like to try to share with the journey that I've been on, this paradigm shift that I've been fortunate enough to live through, starting with land use planning back in really the late 90s for the Great Bear Rainforest, and up until well now. Now, there we go. It's just to give me a little bit of credibility. I have spent some time there. I do have a little bit of a background, and fortunate enough to have to really, I think, being amongst people that have shared their wisdom and their knowledge, like our two previous speakers have. I've been around a lot of that, and I guess a bit of a sponge to soak up all that knowledge from all the naturalists and all the teachers. Traditional ecological knowledge is one of the most wonderful things to have shared with you, and I've had the benefit of that, and of course some time with BC Parks a long time ago in a previous career, and what I'm going to talk about is just that paradigm shift from land use planning and how it's changed, and then the creation of the conservation economy, which includes my small role in it in the world of ecotourism. And if there's time left, I will quickly hit on a bit of what ecotourism should be doing, and that's giving back and being restorative to the areas that we travel through. And of course, some of you may have read about our activities with the marine debris removal initiative last summer, when tourism wasn't possible, but certainly there was a lot of cleanup, and we did a lot of that. So, one of the most stunningly beautiful landscapes I've ever had the great benefit to travel through. And unfortunately, in the 1990s, it all really hung in the balance. Back then, the Great Bear Rainforest was known to British Columbians in the world as the mid-coast timber supply area. And the watersheds, fjords, animals, including humans, might have been lost to industrial logging. But as you'll see, some better thinking prevailed. Now I have to apologize for my map here. It was done quickly. It should include, of course, the villages throughout the Great Bear Rainforest, including Hartley Bay and Klemtu and Bella Bella and many others through that area. But this is the area we're talking about. the Great Salmon Rainforest would be another great name for this place, where it's still fully functioning ecological systems. It's unroaded largely, but well known to the inhabitants there from the last 14,000 years. And I like to remind my guests that that 14,000 years of human history, that is longer than Milan and Rome and Paris and London combined. It just helps to sort of give it that perspective. Of course, it was an area that was traveled through in that region by those people in massive cedar canoes that they made to travel through those waterways. It includes one of my favorites, if I'm allowed to have favorites, the Kit Lope Watershed. This is a photo of us at anchor in the Kit Lope. My friend Cecil refers to it as the largest intact temperate rainforest in the universe. And as far as I know, Cecil Waheed is exactly right in that. It's a massive contiguous area, approximately 1/13 of the province. An area where we travel with deep reverence and respect for all beings there and all peoples there. And I think, you know, as Jens was sharing, to put it in perspective, it's one area on this NASA map of our planet at nighttime where you can see large scale human habitation lit up. And of course, it's this ecological treasure that the BC Parks, Coastal First Nations are managing these parks and conservancies and the greater territory and all the fully functioning ecosystems. And it's sort of this control in this great planetary wide experiment of development that I'm not sure how that's working out, but it's certainly working out well right now for the Great Bear Rainforest, where there's still a beautiful predator-prey relationships that are in balance, and the long-term genetic sustainability is key to that. And of course, there is this beautifully blurred back boundary between the land and the sea. You can't talk about the trees without also talking about where the nitrogen comes from, the salmon, and in this case, the wealth and the richness of the waters of the Great Bear Rainforest. So as I mentioned, I was a small part of this planning tables that the BC government set up. And there was this beautiful shift where there was this recognition of Indigenous rights and title and reconciliation, and that we needed a new way. People came together to have these conversations. It was contentious, it was difficult, but ultimately it was transformative for the land. You'll remember back in the 90s, of course, Clackwood Summer and War in the Woods. That was unfortunately the standard operating in BC. It was not sustainable, obviously. It was not correct. When we needed some leaders. We needed people like Waheed, Cecil Paul, the Heisla, Hanachila, who recognized that this area was far more important than the short-term economic gains to be made from industrial clear-cut forestry. So he welcomed us. He called us the Big White Canoe when we came in on Maple Leaf, our beautiful classic schooner. And with Waheed and the leadership in his community, we were involved with some advocacy for protection and inviting journalists to come out on our trips. And they, of course, wrote stories, which was so important to getting everything out there, and so the world could understand better this place. So it was a consensus-based roundtable, and it was trying to get past all the conflict that was there in those days. And this beautiful thing happened where people like Jens and Sierra Club and many organizations really had this markets campaign where they were able to show that there was much more value and that there had to be a paradigm shift in the conversation. So there was this new vision for what the Great Bear Rainforest could be all about. It got a name, which helped as we took journalists out to write about it, because education is important in these roles to make these change. Keep in mind, in the late 90s, the forest companies had divvied up the entire area without the blessing of the people that lived there. And it was going to be industrial clear-cut logging, but instead, we now have people like my great friend Andy McKinnon here, who was BC's chief forest ecologist and understood the value of the forest and the conservation economy. And we saw that there was a role for ecotourism, where it was thoughtful and small scale, but high value tourism, not like tourism has happened in many parts of our planet. There's many examples of tourism where it's just another resource extraction, really, and it's another negative. I'm saying that as, knowing that we're really trying to shift away from anything like even close to that in the Great Bear Rainforest. Taking in very small numbers of people, very respectfully and very carefully. And and being part of an economy where people are employed, all the dollars stay within the local area. All of our crew are hired locally. All of our provisioning is done locally. And this just allows us to be part of a solution rather than part of a problem. And I guess I can talk more about that later on. But I'm just really honored to have had the opportunity to get to know this beautiful, beautiful part of the world. And of course, skip ahead 20 years that I've been fighting for and planning and traveling in the Great Bear Rainforest. Of course, in 2020 with the pandemic, there was no way we were going to endanger our friends in these small villages and communities by doing tourism there. It was just the health and safety of those communities was paramount. So we didn't have any opportunity to do any tourism, but we approached our friends and said, well, what if we bring our knowledge of all of our operators and our mariners, and we proposed a cleanup on the west side of the Great Bear Rainforest. And notably, we went to the coastal First Nations and sought their blessing first, which they of course gave, because we have that relationship through our protocols with them. And we got to work for 7 weeks last summer. We went out, and this is what we found that was floating across the Pacific. It's another huge problem that our planet faces. I don't have time to get into all of it today, but we involved Heltzig Horizon. This is a native-owned company out of Bella Bella that has this tug and barge. We involved Airspan with their helicopter. We had 100 10 of our crew and about 70 First Nations from their communities. We worked independently because of COVID, but in the end, we collected 127 tons of marine debris. And this is, of course, a shot from way up high in a drone, looking down at that helicopter. That's one of the 2 barges that we took off of the coast, and cleared about 500 odd kilometers of shoreline. And we're just really proud to have had that opportunity to do that. And I think it's a good example of what tourism could and should do, where the opportunity is to be part of the solution. So thank you. Thank you for your interest in the Great Bear Rainforest. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you, David.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for helping us realize the work that you have done to shift from an industrial economy of extraction to a conservation economy. I'd like to, I think my notes tell me that the next step is to hand the meeting, the Zoom conversation, over to Astra, as she will lead us through questions and answers. Astra?
All right, thank you, David. And thank you, as David said, to our wonderful speakers. You all have shared some really amazing insights and wisdom. So moving on to the Q&A, we're going to invite our audience to join this conversation and open the floor to questions for about 20 minutes here. So please remember to use the raise your hand button to indicate that you would like to ask a question. I'll just invite you to unmute your mic once I see your hand is raised, or you can still add your question in the chat box and I will read it out. And your question can be to any of the speakers or a mix of speakers. Okay, looks like we have a question for Kevin right now, and that is, will Maple Leaf Adventures continue to clear debris every subsequent season?
The short answer is absolutely yes. We do it, just you can't land in one of these gorgeous settings and not want to improve it while you're there. However, our guests, they will do a small amount, etc. And we only have so much room on the boats. We don't usually have the tug and barge with us, of course, on our trips. The longer answer is that we've actually invited the provincial government to support us a second time to do a second expedition in 2021, because we're really unsure of when tourism is going to be appropriate and safe again. So we asked all our crew, and they were all very keen to go out and do it again.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And it looks like Ian Waddell, you have your hand up, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hi everybody. I was Minister of Environment in 1999 and on the Desange government, and I was at the beginning. We got involved in the Great Bear Rainforest. I didn't do much, but at least it started, and a lot of people did an incredible job. I believe that we need to make a deal with Alberta, the tar sands, between environmentalists and the oil companies. Kevin, can we use the Great Bear Rainforest deal as an example? People say it's impossible to get done, and we thought it was impossible to get an agreement between environmentalists and logging companies. How did you do it? And could it be done in Alberta with oil? You got it?
And sorry, was that question for me?
For you. If you want me to repeat it, or you got it?
No, I got it, and I'm quite sure I'm nowhere near qualified enough to answer that.
What was the secret of getting the deal for the Great Bear Rainforest? It was remarkable.
It was, and the secret was that the conservation organizations have a great ability to communicate across a broad membership base that really cares very deeply. So they were able to go out and, you know, they say the best defense is an offense, and they did that. They went to the markets, they went to people that were buying things from Home Depot and Lowe's and IKEA, and they said, do you know what these companies are doing in terms of the logging practices? This is what it looks like. Do you want to be part of that? And of course, people are basically good, and people said, no, I don't want to be part of that. And that empowered the conservation organizations to go into the boardrooms of these companies and say, hey, look, we're going to put these images up and it's going to hit your bottom line. And it did. And ultimately, the forest companies came back to these groups and said, okay, well, we want to talk. Let's find a better way. Yeah, that was what happens. And I wasn't part of that. I was on the sidelines watching that and sort of being a cheerleader.
Thanks.
Thank you for that question, Ian. Moving on to the next question here for Spencer. For most of us who live in an urban context, how can we support the sustainability of the rainforest or the forest as a whole?
I think there's a few things that I often recommend when people bring that question is, I think first and foremost, it's about establishing deep relationships with the ecosystem that you reside in. If we think of the quote that Jens shared at the end of his presentation, or kind of the heart of my talk there, was that how do we imagine a marriage between the landscape that we're on? And that momentum sort of builds, that insight, that way of understanding ecosystems just builds into greater society, and starts to reshape how we understand ecosystems at a fundamental level, which in turn influences governmental policy and law and everyday citizens' morals and values. So just being a part of these ecosystems that you exist in and live on is huge for a societal shift, and just really leaning into it. And then on another note is, if you take that same foundation, you can imagine that happening all across British Columbia. And so in the Great Bear Rainforest, when you see issues that challenge that, standing in solidarity in whatever way you can to empower when Indigenous people are doing that amongst their territory, and trying to just do their best to protect these areas from potentially disastrous industrialization. And yeah, so it's this mix of feeling empowered on the ground and doing work in your own backyard, of just these simple changes that we as citizens can do, loving our own ecosystem, and then empowering other people who are doing the same in their ecosystems, and just staying in the know and being aware, and when there's a call out from Indigenous people for allies, for help, to just be aware and to listen and to be available on those calls.
Great. Thank you, Spencer. We don't have any more questions in the chat right now. Does anyone want to chime in with a question here? I don't think we have any raised hands either.
I saw a question that was sent to me privately.
Oh yeah, go for it.
That I could answer. The question is regarding the mother tree. Do we know if this will still be possible in a replanted, reforested area? And I mean, I'm not the scientist who have come out with the studies, but the way I understand it is the oldest, most mature tree will naturally take care of the forest. And so it is possible, but the issue is that we're stuck at there's a huge hindrance in the foundation of that forest with a replanted forest, because there's not as much biodiversity. Throughout my undergrad and graduate time, I did this balance of tree planting and fishing. And it was always unreal to me to be able to cruise through a natural biodiverse forest and then to jump on a cut block and start planting trees where it's a monoculture, it's homogeneous. And so it is possible, but those forests are more vulnerable. And so we're shooting ourselves in the foot with replanted forests on the model on how we replant them right now, where they're mostly, at least where I was doing it, pine, spruce, and some cedar. And yeah, the more homogeneous it is, the more vulnerable it is because there's no biodiversity. So these mother trees are resilient, but they start off at a disadvantage in a replanted forest.
Great. Thank you for answering that question, Spencer. Don't see any more questions here. Let me check if anyone has their hand up. Oh, Her Honor, you have your hand up? Your Honor.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. And it's not so much that I have a question, but I just wanted to, to thank all three speakers for doing such a lovely job. You all brought a very different perspective to what is an incredibly important conversation. And I appreciated it personally very much. And wanted just to thank you for being part of my education. You've certainly given me a lot to think about, and I can see many more avenues for me to make an effort to learn. And I'm grateful to you. So thank you again.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, we have a question for Kevin here, asking if you can describe what ecotourism looks like on one of your trips, specifically in the Great Bear Rainforest, and just delve into the specifics of that a bit more.
Okay, thanks for the question. Yeah, they're week-long journeys. We have two historic vessels that we're the caretakers of. They're both made of wood in BC, the tall ship Maple Leaf and the classic tug Swell. And they're both over 100 years old now. and a true example of how you can cut down a few trees and turn them into a beautiful, beautiful boat and travel on them. We also have a newer vessel named Cascadia. And for those that live in Victoria, all those vessels are moored all winter long at in the inner harbor at Ship's Point. So you're welcome to go down and have a look anytime. The typical trips are, for Great Bear Rainforest, we might leave from Bella Bella and travel in a big loop around Princess Royal Island, one of the homes of the Spirit Bear. We'll travel within Kitasoo, Heihe's traditional territory, up into where Spencer's from, and Gitgat territory, and also down into Heldsick territory in Bella Bella. We may end up in Terrace, but every night is at a wilderness anchorage. And it's, I did hear over here our two honorable commissioners earlier on the call talking about going perhaps bird watching or camping, but we do all that in very comfortable ways on board the vessels. Yeah, happy to share more of that with anybody who would like. Thanks for the question.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. All right.
Astra, might I add a footnote to Kevin's reply? I've had the opportunity to go on an ecotourism with the Maple Leaf vessel a couple of years ago, and found it really it was through the Gulf Islands. And we're looking forward to going on the Cascadia in the end of September, if all falls into place, and up to the Great Bear Rainforest with him. And I am excited about the possibilities, and I'm sure I will be equally fascinated with his crew that will be on the Cascadia. So just a little footnote to affirm that his ventures are really well worthwhile from my perspective.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that context, David. Looks like we have a question from Mary Bernard. Mary, if you want to unmute and go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. I have a question for Spencer. Spencer, I'm always so impressed when people take the time and energy and the commitment to go through a doctoral program. Can you tell me what inspired you to begin a doctoral program, and how do you think you will be able to carry out things differently because you have the doctoral degree at some point?
Thanks. I'm smiling because it was like my ticket out of politics. I was on Leadership Council for the Nation, and I was just so burnt out from being in negotiations. It was during the Northern Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline and all the LNG expansion. And yeah, I just the court case with Enbridge was done, and we had won that, and I just needed to step out to take a breather. And I was working with some great folks in our territory, Nancy Turner and Dana Lepofsky, and they said, Spencer, you should consider a PhD. And I said, yeah, if you can get me out of politics and get me hanging out with my elders more in the bush, I'm there. And they made it happen. Essentially, my work is telling the story of a particular inlet that is very dear to our community. And it tells the story through this lens of, it's very interdisciplinary. And so it tells the story of, with our oral histories, our stories of that place that may seem far-fetched to some folks, but then we match it with archaeology we found, and it creates this beautiful picture. Right now we have 10, 11,000 years of occupation to present in that inlet, but there's no doubt in our mind there's more years. We just got to find the archaeology. But my PhD brings to the conversation, when we imagine that and we imagine these stories and the traditional ecological knowledge of this particular area, what does that say about management and Indigenous rights and title and our relationships with Canadian models of management moving forward? And it's really opened the door to be able to work with scientists, work with archaeologists, work with an array of oceanographers and all kinds of wonderful researchers, and to be able to bring my own lens and my own language to how we talk about history and management and put it together. My hope is that it creates that shift that society needs to understand how we can recalibrate how we engage with environments and ecosystems. And what we're seeing today is things like co-management and research partnerships and management partnerships with Indigenous people on the coast. And it's research like this that brings out new stories and new policies, and that's the hope for where this goes in the future. And maybe down the line, I might, if I become a doctor, if I finish this, I'll be able to have more access to relationships like that, and which bring about funding and capacity to do this actual research.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Spencer, and thank you, Mary, for the wonderful question. Just a note that Her Honor Angelique Bernard had to leave the call, so there was a note from her saying merci and thank you to the presenters, organizers, and participants, and happy Commonwealth Day / en journée de Commonwealth. So moving on from the Q&A here, I believe I'm passing it back to David.
Thank you, Astra. And I would like to welcome back Her Honor Janet Austin, the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, to read, thinking ahead to tomorrow and the Commonwealth Day, the Queen's Commonwealth Message. Your Honor.
Thank you, David. And it is now my very great privilege to deliver the Commonwealth Day Message by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada. Over the coming week, as we celebrate the friendship, spirit of unity, and achievements of the Commonwealth, we have an opportunity to reflect on a time like no other. Whilst experiences of the last year have been different across the Commonwealth, stirring examples of courage, commitment, and selfless dedication to duty have been demonstrated in every Commonwealth nation and territory, notably by those working on the front line who have been delivering healthcare and other public services in their communities. We have also taken encouragement from remarkable advances in developing new vaccines and treatments. The testing times experienced by so many have led to a deeper appreciation of the mutual support and spiritual sustenance we enjoy by being connected to others. The need to maintain greater physical distance or to live and work largely in isolation has for many people across the Commonwealth been an unusual experience. In our everyday lives, we have had to become more accustomed to connecting and communicating via innovative technology, which has been new to some of us, with conversations and communal gatherings, including Commonwealth meetings conducted online, enabling people to stay in touch with friends, families, colleagues, and counterparts who they have not been able to meet in person. Increasingly, we have found ourselves able to enjoy such communication as it offers an immediacy that transcends boundaries or division, helping any sense of distance to disappear. We have all continued to appreciate the support, breadth of experiences, and knowledge that working together brings. And I hope we shall maintain this renewed sense of closeness and community. Looking forward, relationships with others across the Commonwealth will remain important as we strive to deliver a common future that is sustainable and more secure, so that the nations and neighborhoods in which we live, wherever they are located, become healthier and happier places for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor, for bringing the voice of Her Majesty to this small discussion, this small little pebble in the Great Bear Rainforest of conversation. It is but one small step that we are taking as the Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island, to anticipate that we live in a world of a paradigm shift, of life changes, and to recognize that we have a different baseline syndrome that we need to build the future on, so that everybody indeed is happier and healthy. So we'd like to thank particularly Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, Janet Austin. I'd like to thank Her Honor, the Commissioner of Yukon, Angelique Bernard. Merci beaucoup. I'd like to thank Legout, Spencer Greeny, Megwitch, and also to Jens Wieting and say Dankeschön to you for all that you have contributed to our awareness, our new awareness of life. And a special thanks to Kevin Smith as well for the leadership that he provides in terms of the cleanup of the western shore of the Great Bear Rainforest. I'd like to also say thank you to the team, the Zoom team that has put this opportunity together. Nikki, Sage, Ramya, Astra, and Donna. Each of them has spent a lot of energy and creativity in bringing us together. As a gesture of our appreciation for each one of our primary presenters, we will be contributing a donation, a contribution to the Education Legacy Fund with the Victoria Foundation. So as we move from this little place and beyond, there's one more thing that needs to happen. And I pass it back to, I think it's Astra, to help us with the door prize. Take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Just one note before we chat about the door prize, please look out for an email in your inboxes for post-event with information and links of books, videos, and more discussed in today's event. There will also be a link to a quick 1-minute survey. We very much appreciate your feedback to help us improve these events, which we enjoy sharing with you. The email will arrive in your inboxes shortly after the close of events. So now for the door prize draw. This afternoon, the door prize draw will be for 3 books generously donated by Orca Publishers. We have 2 copies of Wolf Island by Nicholas Reed and 1 copy of Nowhere Else on Earth by Caitlin Vernon. Okay. I think we are going to share our screen for the virtual draw. There we are. Okay, first winner here is Kitty. Second winner here is Fayez Timlayan. And the third winner here is A Fire. So for all the winners, please privately message your email address to RCSVI. Again, you can do that by clicking chat and choosing RCSVI from the top of the list of attendees. And with that, I will pass the virtual mic back to you. Finally, David.
Thank you very much, Astra, and congratulations to the 3 different winners. This brings our Zoom conversation, Trees in the Wild, to an end. So as we depart, stay rooted, be grounded, remain embodied and embedded. Journey well.